Good morning, everyone. I've been asked to announce that people who are parked in the lot over here will need to move their vehicles. This is the squad car parking lot. So if you've parked in the lot to the southeast, you can park on the street. There could be parking here. You can park across the street at Lincoln Square. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mayor Diane Marlin from Urbana. The purpose of this event today is to provide as much information as we can about the incidents of the past few days. I wanted to welcome you here. Thank you for being here. It's very important that we get factual information out about what has happened in Urbana. Like everybody else, Usually I'm not at a loss for words, but like everybody else this past week, I think we're all struggling to try to understand this, to try to process this, to try to make sense of it. And I've come to the conclusion that none of that's going to happen this week. And I think it's important that we focus on the fact that this community is just hurting. This week hurts. It hurts bad. And for the next few days, the next few weeks, that's where our focus as a community needs to be. We need to support each other, wrap our arms around each other, reach out and work together as a community and to navigate, to travel through this. And that's what the focus will be each day as we go forward. I want to thank, we have organizations, we have people here who are available to talk with you. If you want to speak to someone today, appreciate Races being here with the counseling team, and I believe CU Tri will be here as well. The Community Coalition, Tracy Parsons is here to also support. So again, it's hard to find the words, but we need to acknowledge the grieving, the loss of 2 children in our community, which makes this especially hurtful for everyone, and what we can do going forward. I also want to acknowledge the work of our first responders who did, I know, everything in their power to save lives, and they continue to do that, and to just recognize that this community, as a community, will get through this. There's a display over here on the side which was put up yesterday, and I think there's a purpose for that. These are kindergarten through 5th graders at Dr. Williams School, and they were asked to draw pictures representing what makes them happy or reflects kindness and respect and caring for each other. And that's exactly what we as a community need to demonstrate in these coming days and weeks. And one of the kids wrote the following, and he made I made a list. And that's what reminded me of where our focus also needs to be, is supporting our children day in and day out. So his list included basketball, family, Fortnite. It was good to see family and was in between Fortnite and basketball, school, running, and my friends. That's what's going to get us through. Friends, family, support, kindness, and caring. So with that, I will extend my deepest condolences to everyone, and really it's to the entire community. And I'll turn this over to Chief Larry Boone. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Today we gather in wake of tragic series of events. 4 lives have been lost across 3 incidents, deeply affecting our Urbana community. Our thoughts and condolences are with the victims' families and all those grieving, to include our officers. The purpose of this press conference is to provide as much information as we responsibly can, while respecting the ongoing investigations and future legal proceedings. This is not about politics. It's about truth, justice, and accountability. As we move forward, let us remain united in our commitment to this community, navigating this crisis with compassion and transparency. We want to thank you for the questions submitted by the community, as well as the media. We try to select those questions that were germane to the incidents. Now, joining me today is State's Attorney Julia Reitz. Julia had prior obligations. She wanted to be here today, so she may have to leave early, but we thank her for her presence. In addition, I have Deputy Chief Smizer, who oversees the Criminal Investigation Division as well as the Services Division. In addition to that, I have Lieutenant Corey C.K. Coker, who manages the Criminal Investigative Division. We also want to thank Thomas Webb, our Information Technology Manager, and his staff, as well as Lisa Curtis, the Police Department's Executive Assistant, for managing the logistics in such a short time period. Now I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant Coker, who will touch on the highlights of each incident, and immediately following, we will answer the questions submitted. Lieutenant Coker.
Good morning. I'm going to state incident overviews of each case chronological, including the case, the current status of the investigation, as long as also what we need from the public. Excuse me. On Friday, February the 7th, officers responded to a shooting in the 2000 block of Water Street at 8:22 p.m. Upon arrival, officers found Sherman D. McCraney, 18, who had sustained a single gunshot wound. Officers immediately rendered life-saving aid before he was transported to Carl Foundation Hospital. Sadly, Mr. McCraney succumbed to his injuries just before 9 p.m. The current status of the investigation is a firearm was located near Mr. McCraney, but we are still determining its role in the incident. Investigators are actively pursuing leads, reviewing evidence, and speaking with potential witnesses. If anyone saw or heard anything in the area, we urge them to come forward. Even small details can be critical to solving a case. We would like to ask the parents of teenagers close to Sherman, have a conversation with your kids. Ask them if they may know anything and see if they can provide us any information that may aid the investigation. We encourage anyone with information to contact UPD or Crime Stoppers anonymously. We cannot discuss specific evidence details, potential suspects, or any investigative leads that would compromise this case. Whether the firearm recovered was used in the shooting, or any unverified or speculative details. Homicide of Darnell DJ Wicks, Melvin Braxton. On Saturday, February the 8th at 7:39 p.m., officers responded to a report of a shooting with injuries in the 900 block of Lenore Drive. Upon arrival, officers found Darnell DJ Wicks, 7, suffering from gunshot wounds. He was immediately transported to Carl Foundation Hospital, where he was pronounced deceased at 8:28 p.m. Melvin Braxton, 43, was located nearby, also suffering from gunshot wounds. He was transported to Carl and later pronounced deceased in the operating room at 9:30 p.m. Darnell Hayes and his 7-year-old son were visiting this residence, and Mr. Hayes was believed to be armed. When Mr. Braxton forced his way inside of the residence, shots were exchanged. Mr. Hayes' court history indicates he has been convicted for weapon offenses, aggravated domestic battery, unlawful restraint, and other serious offenses. UPD considers him a person of interest, and UPD detectives would like to speak with him regarding the events that occurred during this incident. Initially described as a home invasion, which is accurate, further investigation has determined this was also a domestic violence-related incident. Melvin Braxton did not reside at the home, but had arrived there looking for a person with whom he had a prior relationship with. Preliminary investigations indicate Mr. Braxton was intoxicated and armed with a firearm. Furthermore, Mr. Braxton had a verbal confrontation over the telephone with a resident that resides at Lenore Drive before arriving unannounced. The exact sequence of events regarding the shots being fired is still under investigation. No determination has been made regarding which gun was responsible for firing the shots that struck DJ. Melvin Braxton and DJ Wicks have no known relationship with each other. Melvin Braxton was not a caretaker of DJ Wicks. Mr. Braxton's court history indicates a multitude of traffic offenses and alcohol infractions. This case was labeled as domestic violence based on Melvin Braxton's relationship with a different person inside the house on Lenore. The Illinois Domestic Violence Act provides specific definitions on what is and what is not considered domestic violence. UPD does not have any previous records involving domestic reports that have been taken at this residence or between Braxton and the other person. Braxton was known to the occupants of the residence. This was not a random act. No arrests have been made at this time, but investigators are actively following leads. We do not believe this incident is connected to the homicide of Sherman D. McCraney on Friday night. Any other residents that have exterior surveillance cameras in the area are urged to check footage and contact UPD at our non-emergency phone number. Anyone with firsthand information about the incident is encouraged to come forward. Community support is critical in helping us move this investigation forward. Further details on the evidence recovered and I cannot speak to, and any legal determinations or potential charges forthcoming. Richard Meeks. On Tuesday, February 11th, officers responded to Mr. Meeks' residence at 8:31 a.m. after a coworker was summoned to check on Meeks, who had not shown up for work. The reporting person discovered Mr. Meeks deceased inside. Officers found Mr. Meeks with apparent stab wounds to his torso. A homicide investigation was immediately launched by the Urbana Police Department. Through swift investigative efforts, detectives identified Sharon Moore as a suspect. Moore and Meeks had a prior relationship. Moore was located, arrested, and now is facing murder charges. This remains an active legal case, and further details cannot be released at this time. If anyone had contact with Mr. Meeks or Ms. Moore leading up to this incident, we asked them to reach out to investigators. Any additional information that could aid this case is welcome. Specifically, any video or firsthand account of seeing Meeks and Moore together leading up to his death. None of these three incidents appear to be connected. Each case is being investigated independently based on its own circumstances. Thank you.
Okay, we'll be moving into the portion where we talk about the questions that have been gathered from members of the community and the media. So we will take some time to review those questions and provide answers to them. I'll begin with the first question. This is a question that was posed more than once from members of the community, so we have tried to move some of the combine some of them to provide an overview. The question is, how many reports and arrests has UPD made for domestic violence in Urbana since 2023? And also, what are the racial demographics in Urbana of those arrested for domestic violence? So I can say domestic calls for service, we will start with those numbers. In 2023, the Urbana Police Department responded to 1,287 domestic calls for service. In 2024, the Urbana Police Department responded to 1,136 calls for service. To break it down a little farther, domestic battery reports that were taken by the Urbana Police Department. In 2023, we took 439 police reports titled domestic battery. In 2024, we took 437 police reports entitled domestic battery. And of those domestic battery reports, the ones that resulted in arrest, in 2023, the Urbana Police Department made 184 arrests for domestic battery. And in 2024, the Urbana Police Department made 194 arrests for domestic battery. As for the demographics of the arrestees, broken down by race, Asian race accounted for 2% of arrests, Black accounted for 75% of arrests. White accounted for 23% of arrests.
The next question asked is one that I'm going to answer. It apparently came from the media, and the question is, were there any protective orders or prior legal actions involving Melvin Braxton? We did review Melvin Braxton's prior criminal history, and there were no protective orders, no orders of protection, no contact orders, that sort of thing in place with regards to Mr. Braxton. He did have a prior criminal history that largely consisted of traffic offenses, including driving under the influence of alcohol. He was on probation for the felony offense of driving while revoked. At the time of this incident, as a convicted felon, he could not legally possess or own a firearm.
So we want to more crystallize Deputy Chief's response to demographics and how we interface with that community by the nature of the calls.
Certainly. Just to expound upon the answer a little bit more, although it wasn't asked directly in the question, we think it is important to explain that they asked for demographics of arrestees, but we should also provide demographics of victims. So of the demographics of all domestic report 2024 police reports, the demographic breakdown is 2% of persons listed as a victim in those reports were Asian, 66% were Black, 31% were white.
Thank you. All right, so the question for me from the media, how can the city better protect and help survivors of domestic violence? So the strategy that I'm going to present is not just for domestic violence. It can fit a multitude of social ills, concerns, things of that nature. So my approach to addressing crime is anchored in a comprehensive three-pronged strategy: prevention, intervention, lastly, enforcement. There's room for enforcement. Everybody cannot be rehabilitated. In that order, upon analyzing initial data, we identified that domestic violence is a primary driver of violent crime in our community. To address this, we began transparently sharing domestic violence statistics via social media, including raw data and geographical hotspots to raise awareness. Furthermore, we engage with key community partners such as Courage Connection, Land of Lincoln, Legal Aid, and other organizations working in the domestic violence field. If there are any organizations here today that would like to collaborate with UPD, we would gladly share said data with you as well. This collective approach aims to educate, empower the community to take action on domestic violence and gun violence as well. Ultimately, I propose the establishment of a coordinated domestic violence response unit. This is nothing more than alternative response policing, a partnership that would integrate specialized responders, law enforcement, social services, healthcare providers, into a unified support system. This initiative would ensure a targeted, efficient response to domestic violence as well as other violence, with a built-in accountability measure for the participants. This collaboration would provide a robust mechanism for collective impact, with daily access to domestic violence data, because we can't do anything without data. If you respond anecdotally, you can't measure it. That would allow key stakeholders to monitor trends, such as reoccurring offenders, victims, and calls for service, some of the things Deputy Chief Smizer just touched upon. This real-time data sharing will facilitate timely, coordinated action in the field by having those professionals work as a cohesive unit. We can deploy targeted intervention directly while constantly reviewing and refining our strategies based on data. The response model could include, for example, safety measures such as implementing apps for survivors to contact support or notify trusted individuals, economic empowerment, partnering with local businesses and organizations to create job opportunities and financial assistance programs for survivors. Lastly, community engagement, collaborating with grassroots organizations and faith-based organizations to foster community-driven initiative to challenge social norms around domestic violence, to reduce the stigma. And finally, we would ensure accountability through ongoing evaluations and regular strategies reviews to measure how effective we are. So in a sense, we're talking about a group of disciplines that work together, 8 to 5, analyzing data, each discipline being held accountable by the tip of the spear, whoever that person may be, to measure impact. And once that community or that neighborhood is healthy, we move to the next one. I can't explain it any clearer than that. What I just said is what I've been saying since I arrived.
The next question comes from the community. It was a question that states, how many guns seized in Urbana has UPD traced since 2023? I can say UPD currently has 198 firearms in our possession, and we have completed traces on 101 of those. And we will continue to do so until the backlog is complete.
So the media asked, thank you. The media asked what driving factors are behind these incidents and other similar tragedies. Do you think gang violence is a factor? And this is a conversation we've been having for many years here in the Champaign-Urbana community about what is gang violence and where does all of this originate from. And I think we've said for years, we're not speaking about the classic view of gang violence with large-scale organized organizations with top-down hierarchies and that sort of thing. When we talk about gang violence here in our community, we're talking about affiliations of largely young men, although from time to time there are young women involved. They are affiliated based on neighborhoods, based on families, based on schools, and they are fluid. Sometimes a certain group will be affiliated and then others will break off and form other groups. And their affiliations are sometimes based on ongoing feuds, based on past shootings that have evolved beyond the individuals who were the key players in the shootings onto groups of young people who might not ever have met or have been aware at all of those original players. And so the driving factors behind these incidents are need to be affiliated with others, a need to belong, economic indicators, drivers, lack of a view of a sustainable future, and the availability of firearms. The availability of illegal firearms in this community is overwhelming. I cannot stress that enough. I myself handle the juvenile delinquency caseload, and the number of young people who come into our system who are in possession of firearms is staggering and exhausting. Where they are getting these guns, how they are keeping them, the fact that they don't even know what they're carrying or how to use them is terrifying and should be for everyone. And that is really some of the most driving factor is the presence of illegal firearms and their accessibility to young people in our community. And the fact that they believe that they have to carry these firearms to protect themselves from each other because of feuds that have nothing to do with them is tragic. And there are so many people, so many organizations out there who are aware of this and who are trying to do the good work to bring these young people together. I spoke on after the coalition meeting with a young man who has been involved in gun violence in the past and is now trying to make changes in our community. And he tells me that he's had the opportunity to bring two young people together who are on opposite sides of a feud and have them sit down and realize that they both shared so much in common. And that is what needs to happen, is we need to get past all of these perceived differences and sit down and move forward together. But in my opinion, the driving factor behind these incidents, again, is the availability and accessibility of illegal firearms and the fact that young people and even older people, frankly, see the possession and the use of these firearms as the way that they need to resolve their differences. That is what absolutely has to change.
All right, this is a question for me, obviously from the media. Chief Boone said in his open letter that UPD needs an urgent review of how we respond to domestic violence and firearm access, sort of what Julia just spoke about. So in addition to tracking domestic violence, we also began collecting data on gun-related activities. Some of you might have seen that we put this out monthly. And what the data revealed was deeply concerning. When we cross-reference domestic violence with our gun data, we found an alarming correlation with both aligning almost perfectly. Understanding the deadly intersection of domestic violence and guns, domestics goes up tremendously when you introduce a gun into the situation. As such, we started capturing gun data and researching the origin of the illegal gun. We are doing this to understand the flow of how illegal guns get in our community. And from my prior assignment, I'll give you an example. And we're starting the process of doing that here as well. So I'm formerly from Norfolk, Virginia, where gun activity was rampant. And one of the things we started doing, as opposed to merely recovering a gun and vouchering a gun, when I say voucher, just put it in evidence, we started investigating the gun. The gun, 9 times out of 10, was an illegal gun. So what that told us was who purchased the gun, how soon after they purchased the gun was the gun used in the crime, who we recovered the gun from, and what type of crime it was. We recovered 5,000 guns. Of the 5,000, only 200 was reported stolen. That's a red flag. That's a red flag for straw purchasing. So what we started doing was knocking on the door of the original gun purchaser. Mr. Smith, your gun was used in a homicide. Did you know it was missing or stolen? And because at the time we had no laws that required one to report their gun lost or stolen, if Mr. Smith was purchasing guns and making them available to illegal or felons or young folk, we had no mechanism in place to hold him accountable. So once I made public, because this is how I conduct the input of community. I release everything when it comes to data. Once I made public that we recovered 5,000 guns and only 200 was reported lost or stolen, immediately from the General Assembly there was input from senators, congressmen, delegates, you name it. They wanted to know what could we do. And one of the things we were able to do, a couple things. One, we made it mandatory that you had to report your gun lost or stolen. Two, we made it mandatory that you can no longer buy 100 guns a day, because in Virginia you can buy as many as you can afford. We made it so you can only buy one. When we did that, it changed behavior. It let folks know we were watching them. Go ahead and on to say, here in Illinois, Illinois is rated number 4 in terms of gun laws. It is graded A+. But the problem is the surrounding states. Some of them don't grade that high in terms of gun logs. Some of them grade as high as a C-, some of them are Fs, and I won't name the states. You know what surrounds Illinois. So, with that, we're starting the same process here. We are doing e-traces, and that simply means who purchased the gun, or the origin of the gun. Then we're going to start looking at patterns as to who is in possession of the gun, because in Norfolk, what we found 100% of the time, guns purchased legally, guns ended up in black and brown communities in the hands of our youth and convicted felons. That is a mechanism, that is a process, that is an illegal process that involved multiple people. We got the ATF involved, and if the data suggests the same thing here, we're going to get the ATF involved as well. But we're currently looking at our sample, and something tells me, because regardless of where it is, there's nothing new under the sun. So, but that's not just for domestic violence, because there are some mothers in here that simply lost their sons to gun violence. And as I said previously, I take that near and dear to heart, having grown up in those environments. I was a professional, and I apologize if I offend, but I have no time for let's take a break and be rational about it and get back to it a year from now. We need action now. Let me close by saying this. To get to where I am, I've taken the oath to the Virginia Constitution 8 times and the oath to the Illinois Constitution once. I embrace the Second Amendment. I have no desire to encroach upon anyone's Second Amendment privilege.
A media inquiry in regards to what resources are available for families affected by domestic violence. This form is required by the Illinois Domestic Violence Act for police officers and police agencies to pass out to victims of domestic violence. This predates my own employment, which is, I don't know how long the Urbana Police Department has done it, but I've been here almost 25 years. But it explains the process of getting an order of protection, provides them some of their rights towards this case, and also on the back, we provide a few support services, such as the state's attorney's victim advocacy, the Courage Connection, suggesting some mental health treatment, and also a telecare for elderly victims of abuse and neglect.
So the media asked about Karina's Law, and I'm going to answer that question about whether Karina's Law will help to prevent domestic violence incidents, and are there any difficulties that may arise during its application. So Karina's Law, for those of you who are not familiar, is a law that was recently signed by the governor, and it is in response to a domestic violence fatality, homicide that occurred up in Chicago, where an individual obtained an order of protection against her abuser, and he then came into her home with a firearm and shot and killed her. So if you obtain an order of protection against somebody, a part of that order of protection includes an order that the that the respondent, the abuser, the person who's subject to the order of protection, is not to possess or own any firearms while the order of protection is in place. There was not a whole lot of enforcement mechanisms to that. And so what Karina's law did was create a process where a person who's seeking an order of protection can also ask that the judge issue a search warrant, order that a search warrant be issued, so that law enforcement can then go into the offender's home and search for and seize any firearms that that person may own or possess. That just was signed into law by the governor. It goes into effect soon, and law enforcement and the courts are now figuring out how to make that work through the process. I believe that Karina's law is going to be helpful, but it is a new process, and a search warrant is a very serious remedy, and there are requirements for search warrants. So it's not that in every order of protection there is always going to be a search warrant issued so that every offender's home is going to be searched. There has to be a reason to get a search warrant. There has to be a reasonable belief that there are firearms in a home, and that the individual who has those firearms is going to use them. So the court has to make specific findings, and then law enforcement has to execute that search warrant. There's always safety concerns, particularly when you're talking about domestic violence and firearms. And so our law enforcement agencies are going to have some time to plan, make sure that they're able to safely execute these search warrants. But I do believe that Karina's law is a good step, but it is one of many steps that need to be taken when we're addressing domestic violence and the use of firearms, legal or illegal, when we're talking about domestic violence situations. And I will just also add that we are working right now with Judge Ramona Sullivan, who handles the order of protection call. The sheriff and I and law enforcement agencies and Judge Sullivan are working together to create a process to make sure that we are going to be able to use Karina's law as it was intended.
Okay, this question is from the community. What does the chief mean when he says we need to tackle root causes of intimate partner violence? What we simply mean by this is addressing underlying conditions that contribute to domestic violence, such as social norms, which may include gender roles, including power and control, economic factors, stress, poverty, which naturally causes a stressful household, mental health and substance abuse, untreated mental health or substance abuse can play a significant role in domestic violence. Childhood trauma. I can tell you, I grew up in a household where I've seen my mother hit the floor from her boyfriend, and capturing your mother rolling on the floor and holding her jaw. You'll never forget that. Those are some of the things that could influence our youth. Fortunately, it did not influence me. So we need to think about those societal ills that contribute to domestic violence. Not only that, all crime. Everything I just mentioned affects all crime. When people live in despair and they feel as though they have no hope, you know, they act out. You can go any city in America. You know those communities when you see them. I can guarantee you the data looks like the data on Varder and Salter or, you know, other places. That's just the reality, folks. And we cannot do it in a silo. It requires all of us narrowly focused, data-driven, drilling down on the issues. And once we make that neighborhood healthy, we move on to the next. It's like treating cancer. There's a process to this. They're proving best practices that work. But when we're doing this, and everybody's doing that, it doesn't work. We got to do this. be surgically focused. I use the word surgically. I don't mean it as a military term. It's just my experience and where I'm from, that's what we say. So, I want to thank you all for coming out. Our commitment to justice remains unwavering. Solving these cases and preventing future tragedies is our top priority. Remember, justice is a process, not an event, and UPD is fully dedicated to seeing this through. At the time, we will not answer any more questions. You are free to stay here amongst yourselves and talk about this event. If you want to contact either of us, I'll leave a card right here, and I'll be happy to talk to anybody at any time or any place. So with that, that concludes our presentation. Thank you for coming out.